They laughed before he even sang. It started as a ripple, a few chuckles from the back rows, then grew louder as the cameras found the boy standing alone on the massive stage. He was small for his age, thin, wearing shoes that looked like they had walked 1,000 dusty roads. The lights felt too bright, the room too big. If you've ever been judged before you even opened your mouth, stay right here till the end of this story, because what happened next changed everything. And before we go any further, if stories like this move you, inspire you, or remind you to believe again, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. You're part of this journey too. His name was Mateo. He came from a coastal village in the Philippines where the ocean was generous with beauty but cruel with opportunities. His father had been a fisherman until a storm took both the boat and the hope of steady income. His mother washed clothes for neighbors, her hands always smelling of soap and salt. Music was never a plan, it was a shelter. Mateo learned to sing not from lessons, but from an old radio that crackled every night when the power didn't go out. He sang to help his mother forget her tired back. He sang to drown out the sound of hunger when dinner was only rice and soy sauce. He sang because when he did, the world felt kinder. Standing on that stage, he could feel the laughter pressing against his chest. One judge raised an eyebrow. Another leaned back, arms crossed. Someone whispered, and the audience reacted with that familiar skepticism reserved for kids who look like they don't belong. Mateo swallowed. His hands trembled. For a split second, he thought about turning around, about apologizing for taking up space. But then he remembered his mother's voice that morning, soft but firm, telling him that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about singing anyway. Simon Cowell asked him why he chose this song. Mateo answered simply. He said it was the song his father loved most, the one he played on the radio while mending nets at dawn. The room quieted a little, but doubt still hung in the air. A poor boy. An old song. Big promises rarely survive that combination. The music began. Mateo didn't rush. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and when he opened them, something had changed. His first note wasn't loud, but it was steady, grounded, like someone who had carried heavy things for a long time and learned how to stand straight anyway. The laughter stopped. Whispers died. People leaned forward without realizing it. His voice had a texture that didn't match his age, weathered, aching, honest. He didn't imitate the original, he told the story in his own way, bending the melody with emotion instead of showing off. As the performance went on, you could feel the shift. The audience wasn't watching a poor boy anymore. They were listening to a storyteller. Every note carried nights without electricity, long walks to school, the quiet pride of a family that never gave up. Mateo sang like someone who understood longing, like someone who had already lost things and still believed in tomorrow. One judge's smile faded into shock. Another placed a hand over their mouth. And Simon, usually stone-faced, usually impossible to impress, sat completely still. His eyes followed every breath, every rise and fall of the song. When Mateo reached the emotional peak, his voice cracked just slightly, not from weakness but from truth. It was the kind of imperfection that makes a moment unforgettable. By the final note, the theater was silent. Not the awkward silence of disappointment, but the sacred kind, the kind that comes when people don't want to break the spell. Mateo opened his eyes, unsure if he had done enough. For a terrifying second, nobody clapped. Then Simon stood up. The applause exploded, a wave of sound that crashed over the stage. People were on their feet, cheering, some wiping their eyes. The same crowd that laughed minutes earlier now roared his name. Mateo's knees nearly gave out. He didn't cry right away, he just stared, trying to understand how a song could turn strangers into believers. Simon spoke, his voice quieter than usual. He admitted that he had judged too quickly. He said the performance reminded him why music matters, not because of perfection, but because of honesty. His eyes glistened as he told Mateo that what he heard wasn't just a voice, it was a life. And then, something rare happened. Simon paused, took a breath, and wiped away a tear. Backstage, Mateo thought about his village, about the radio, about his father smiling somewhere beyond the waves. He thought about every time he had been overlooked, every laugh that tried to shrink him. None of it mattered now, not because he had won approval, but because he had proven something to himself. He belonged. The judges voted, and the result felt almost secondary. The real victory had already happened. A poor boy with borrowed shoes had walked onto the biggest stage and reminded the world that greatness doesn't ask permission. It arrives quietly, carries truth in its voice, and leaves people changed. As the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly settled, Mateo whispered a thank you not to the judges, not to the cameras, but to the song that carried his story. His journey was far from over, but that night became a beginning. For him, and for everyone watching who had ever been underestimated. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that your background does not define your future, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs courage today. Because somewhere out there, another Mateo is listening to an old radio, wondering if their voice matters. And as you've just seen, it does. They laughed before he even sang, and that laughter didn't come from cruelty alone, it came from habit. The habit of underestimating boys who look like they've slept hungry, the habit of doubting voices that don't arrive wrapped in confidence and polish. The camera zoomed in on his face, catching the flicker of fear he tried to hide. If you've ever felt small in a room that felt too big, stay with this story till the very end, because what unfolded next didn't just silence a crowd, it rewrote a destiny. And before we go deeper, if stories like this give you hope, if they remind you why believing still matters, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and walk this journey with us. Mateo stood center stage, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped the way his mother used to clasp them when she prayed at night. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least that's what the world had always told him. He came from a village where dreams were whispered quietly so disappointment wouldn't hear. Where children learned early that survival came before ambition. Where music was a comfort, not a career. And yet, here he was, breathing in recycled air under million-dollar lights, facing judges whose opinions could change everything. His childhood played in fragments in his mind as the host asked questions. Early mornings with the smell of fish and diesel. Afternoons helping his mother scrub clothes by the river until his fingers wrinkled. Evenings when the radio crackled to life, bringing songs from faraway places that felt like messages meant just for him. His father loved Hotel California. Said it sounded like a story about being trapped and free at the same time. Mateo didn't fully understand it then. He just knew it made his father smile. When the storm came, it didn't ask permission. The sea took the boat, and with it the family's only steady income. Mateo learned what fear tasted like, that metallic bitterness in the back of the throat when adults whisper at night. He learned how pride keeps people silent even when they need help. And he learned that singing could lift the weight off a room, if only for a few minutes. So he sang. At birthdays, at small fiestas, at funerals where his voice trembled but carried comfort. People would stop and listen, surprised. But surprise never turned into opportunity. Life moved on. On the stage, the judges waited. The audience waited. The laughter faded into an uneasy quiet. Simon asked about the song choice, and Mateo answered honestly. He didn't dress it up. He didn't pitch a sob story. He just told the truth. That this song reminded him of home. That it reminded him of his father. That it felt like his story too. A few people nodded, but doubt still lingered like fog. Then the music began. The opening notes floated out, and Mateo stepped into them like stepping into familiar water. Cold at first, then comforting. He didn't sing to impress. He sang to remember. His voice carried a gentle rasp, the kind earned by night singing softly so neighbors wouldn't complain, by mornings humming while walking miles to school. Each line felt lived in. Each pause felt intentional. Something shifted in the room, almost imperceptibly at first. A woman in the front row stopped recording and just listened. A man leaned forward, elbows on knees. The judges exchanged glances, sensing it too. This wasn't a performance chasing applause. This was a confession set to melody. As Mateo reached the chorus, his voice grew, not louder but fuller, like it had found its spine. Emotion cracked through the notes, raw and unfiltered. He sang about a place you can never leave, and somehow made it about poverty, about expectation, about the invisible walls built around people long before they're old enough to fight them. The crowd forgot to breathe. Simon's face changed. The skeptical tilt of his head softened. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment but in focus. He'd heard thousands of singers. Technically perfect ones. Loud ones. Confident ones. But this was different. This was someone telling the truth without armor. Mateo's hands stopped shaking. He planted his feet. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about whether he belonged. He was just there. Present. Honest. When he hit the final lines, his voice wavered, not because he was weak, but because the emotion was heavier than the air. It landed anyway. Silence followed. A long, sacred silence that felt like the world holding its breath. Then applause. Thunderous. Unrestrained. People rose as if pulled by strings. Cheers echoed, bouncing off the walls, crashing back onto the stage. Mateo blinked, stunned. His heart raced. He bowed awkwardly, unsure what to do with all that sound. Simon stood. Slowly. Deliberately. And the room reacted like it knew something important was about to happen. When he spoke, his voice wasn't sharp. It was gentle. He said he'd made a mistake judging too soon. He said that sometimes music reminds us why we fell in love with it in the first place. He paused, eyes glassy, and admitted that the song took him somewhere personal, somewhere honest. A tear escaped before he could stop it. The other judges followed, praising not just the voice, but the courage. They talked about storytelling, about authenticity, about how rare it is to hear someone sing like they have nothing to prove. Mateo listened, overwhelmed. He thought of his mother watching on a borrowed TV, hands clasped again. He thought of his village gathered around a screen in the community hall, cheering, crying, believing. Backstage was a blur. Crew members smiled. Strangers congratulated him. But Mateo stepped aside for a moment, needing quiet. He closed his eyes and breathed. For years, he'd carried the belief that he was invisible. That belief cracked that night. The next days changed quickly. Interviews. Messages. Invitations. But not everything was easy. Fame didn't erase poverty overnight. His family still worried about bills. Still lived modestly. Mateo struggled with guilt, why him and not others from his village just as talented. He returned home between rounds, grounding himself. He sang for his neighbors, just like before. He helped his mother. He visited the shore where his father once worked, singing softly to the waves. On the show, pressure grew. Expectations can be heavier than doubt. Critics dissected his performances. Some said the magic would fade. Some said he was a one-song wonder. Mateo felt the old fear creeping back. But this time, he had something new. Proof. Proof that his voice mattered. Proof that honesty connects. In his next performance, he stumbled slightly. Not vocally, but emotionally. The nerves showed. And instead of hiding it, he embraced it. The judges noticed. Growth. Resilience. The audience stayed with him, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Weeks passed. Each round, Mateo dug deeper. He learned technique, yes, but he never lost the core. The boy who sang to survive. The boy who believed music could make rooms kinder. Simon became a quiet supporter, offering advice without pressure. One night, he told Mateo that the best artists never forget where they came from. Mateo nodded. He never would. The finale arrived like a sunrise after a long night. Mateo walked onto the stage stronger now, posture straight, eyes clear. He carried his village with him. His family. Every laugh that once cut. Every silence that once hurt. He sang not Hotel California this time, but the spirit of it was there. the spirit of telling a truth people didn't know they needed. When it ended, the reaction was immediate. Love. Respect. Tears again. Whatever the final result, something irreversible had happened. Mateo had crossed a line inside himself. After the show, life didn't become a fairy tale. It became a responsibility. Mateo used his platform to support music programs back home. He spoke about hunger, about dignity, about how talent exists everywhere but opportunity does not. He never forgot the laughter, because it reminded him how far he'd come. Years later, people would still share that first clip. They laughed at the poor Filipino boy, then his Hotel California left Simon in tears. But Mateo knew the real story was bigger. It was about the quiet power of persistence. About choosing courage on days when fear feels louder. About singing anyway. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that your beginnings don't limit your endings, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs a reminder tonight. Because somewhere, right now, a boy or girl is standing at the edge of a dream, hearing laughter, wondering if they should turn back. And if they stay, if they sing, if they believe everything can change.